Well, hey there. If you are watching this, that means that we have landed outside for our Sunday morning worship service. You can see we tried to replicate that a little bit. The beautiful outdoors behind me. Steve did a great job of putting that together, and I would imagine that the effect of the fan blowing through my hair is another great picture of us being outside for you, right? It's just awesome to be able to do this outside. You know, whatever. Maybe you're sitting on your back deck watching this this morning. Just summer in the Northwoods is such a special thing. Speaking of summer, we've gone through the book of Proverbs, right, this whole summer, and we've learned a lot. We've talked primarily about wisdom and about the pursuit of wisdom and about the passing on of wisdom that Solomon did, especially with his children, as he's writing this audience. Or this letter to an audience of his children, at least first and foremost, and then, of course, to any of the followers of God. But we've learned some things like the fear of the Lord being the beginning of that wisdom or knowledge. We've talked about the principle of trusting the Lord your God with all your heart. We've talked about honoring the Lord with your wealth. We talked about our heart being of utmost importance. Above all else, he writes, guard your heart. And then we talked last week, Rick did anyway, about the impact of words, right? We all know that line that says, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And we all say, yeah, right. Now, before we go any farther, I want to ask you something a little bit personal. How many friends would you say that you have? Now, in the modern context, many that are watching this have had large amounts of friends on social media. Just for fun, if you were on Facebook or Snapchat, how many friends do you have on there? Just a rough estimate. Go ahead and tell somebody that is sitting in the room with you, or say it out loud, even if you're on your own. How many Facebook friends do you have, or Snapchat friends do you have? Sounds like you're pretty popular. Certainly, the social media influence has shaped the way that we use the word friend, right? Many, really most of those friends that we have online are people that we don't even have a conversation with if we're being real, right? Now, you might not even know them. If they were sitting next to you, or if you ran into them at the store, you might not even realize that they were your friend. Now, if that type of friend is out there at the edges, so to speak, then maybe there's a little closer are the people who are people that you share a hobby with, like a fishing or golfing buddy for the guys or the athletic types, or a girlfriend or bestie would be something maybe that the girls might say, a buddy, a bestie. And then, so those friends are kind of in here. And then there are the friends that are in here. The ones who are close, the ones who know your stuff and still want to be around you. Now, most of the time for us, these deeper relationships probably happen naturally over the course of time, organically, we might say with that modern word, right? But maybe there's a friendship or two or three that you've had where you've looked at each other and you've made an official pact Like, I'm going to be there for you, and I want you to know that I consider you to be my friend. I read a quote this week from a man named Jay Kessler. Jay was the longtime president of Youth for Christ and also of Taylor University. And here's what he said. He said, "One of my goals in life is to wind up with 8 men who are willing to carry one of my handles." 8 people that are that close. That's what he had as a goal in life, and I think that's an admirable goal. Now for us, however it has happened, those close friendships are important to us. Those are the friendships that I want to spend most of our time talking about today, and we're going to see what Solomon has to say actually about the value of vital friendship. One conclusion that I hope you'll come to with me today is you can't be wise without friendship. Remember now, wisdom is what we've been talking about throughout this series from Proverbs. That's what we've been going after. And so as I will lay out, you can't be wise if you don't have friends, if you don't have friendship, people who are close to you. So as Solomon writes a few times, actually, be wise. Be wise in choosing those who will be your friends. In chapter 12, verse 26, he says, "The righteous, they choose their friends carefully, but the way of the wicked leads them astray." As you choose your friends carefully, as you think about the friendships in your past that you hopefully chose carefully, what are some friendship traits that should be important for those choices? Solomon gives us actually quite a few. At the top of the list are authenticity and honesty. In chapter 27, we're going to look there for a few verses. Solomon says this. He says, "Better is an open rebuke than hidden love. Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses." Do you have friendships that are like that? Someone willing to look you in the eye and be real. Someone willing to tell you like it is or tell you what they see. A friend who is careful and thoughtful and yet authentic. A friend that has shown themselves to be trustworthy, trustworthy enough that even when they say something that stings a little bit at first, that's what Solomon says, right? You know they want what's best for me. Wounds from a friend can be trusted. And then Solomon will give us a visual. Well, maybe it's more like a sensual that helps us understand what he's getting at a little bit. Let me set it up a little. He says, you know that smell when someone walks into the room when they're wearing your favorite perfume or cologne? Like it's just the right amount. Solomon writes, the heartfelt counsel of a friend, the real life on life of a friend is as sweet as that. It's as sweet as perfume and incense. Yeah. Now that's something that helps us understand. Staying there in chapter 27, there's a verse that's behind probably every men's Bible study group. Well, in reality, I'm not sure why it isn't equally applicable in every women's group too. That verse, of course, is, "As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another." Solomon here is teaching us that other trait. Besides honesty and authenticity, we also need accountability in our friendships. Accountability is super important in real friendship. Of course, this is tied to that friend that is willing to give you an open rebuke, that friend who's willing to give a stinging assessment of something that they witnessed or saw that just isn't consistent with who you are, or isn't considered consistent with who you want to be, or isn't consistent with who Christ has called you to be. And so let me ask you this: do you have a friend who is willing to ask you the tough questions? One that you can share your stuff or struggles with and is willing to walk alongside and help hold you accountable. Not just really to them, of course, but to God. A real friend will sharpen their friend, and it will look a little bit like the work of an ancient blacksmith hammering iron into shape and eventually turning it into a knife or a sword. Sharp. Iron sharpening iron. As you cultivate your friendships, be on the lookout for authenticity, honesty, and accountability. There's one more trait I want to talk about today because Solomon mentions it a few times, and that is loyalty. I'm actually going to pull his thoughts outside of Proverbs to the book of Ecclesiastes, of course written by him too, that is from Ecclesiastes 4, 9, and 10, often said at weddings, but I want to put it in the context of friendship because that's also part of what he's talking about. Two are better than one, because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity the one who falls and has no one to help them up. Again, we know about this from a romantic or a marriage relationship, and sure, it fits that. But it talks about really the need for all of us to have a friend who is there with us, a friend who will help us do something together, that will be there when we fall down. They'll be there to help us up. If it was only in the context of marriage, well then how would a single person ever benefit from this? Of course, this applies at least as much to friendship as it would to a romantic relationship. Because a loyal friend will be there. They'll be there when you fall. They'll be there when you need them. He writes about loyalty quite a few times in Proverbs too. We're going to look in chapter 18 and then in chapter 17. In 18 he says, "One who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother." Unreliable friend leads towards ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. And another passage, a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for a time of adversity. I want to read or tell you about a story that I read this week that talked about that type of friendship, a loyal friend, a friend that loves at all times. It goes back to two young men who were friends that enlisted together during World War I. These two friends, they trained together. They were shipped overseas together. They even fought side by side in the trenches. But during one of the attacks, one of the two was critically wounded on the battlefield, and that battlefield was so filled with barbed wire and other obstacles that he was unable to crawl back to the foxhole. As enemy fire was going all around them, it looked to be suicidal for his friend to go out towards him. And yet his friend decided to try. But his sergeant noticed, and he knew those two and how tight they were, so he yanked him back and he ordered him not to go. He says, "Too late. You can't do him any good anyway. You'll only get yourself killed." A few minutes later, the sergeant was distracted, and so the man took the opportunity and went out onto the field after his friend. And shortly after, he staggered back, now mortally wounded himself, carrying his dead friend in his arms. The sergeant was at the same time angry and yet deeply moved. He's dead, and now you're dying. It just wasn't worth it. With almost his last breath, the young but dying man replied, "Oh yeah, it was, Sarge. When I got to him, the only thing he said was, 'I knew you'd come, Jim.'" A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for a time of adversity. So you should be looking for friends like that, friends who will hold you accountable, who will be authentic and honest, someone who will be loyal. Do you want to have friends like that? As I told my kids a few times as they were growing up, if you want to have friends, you need to be a friend. So let's flip the script just a little bit here. Instead of what we want in other people, being careful in how we choose our friends, let me ask you this. How good of a friend are you? We're going to step away for a moment, the book of Proverbs and the writings of Solomon, and we're going to look at another biblical example of friendship through someone that Solomon actually, I'm sure, had to know well. It was almost certainly somebody he would have called Uncle Jonathan, even though they were not even blood relatives. You see, David, as you may know, was Solomon's father. And in the book of 1 Samuel, it tells us all about the great and close friendship that David had with Jonathan. It really is an amazing story. Jonathan, you see, had a father named Saul. Saul was the first king over Israel, a powerful man, a legend in history, at least in Israel's history. And after some good years as king, he was the one that God chose to be in that position. He had good years where he followed God, but like in many people who get into those positions of power, he became self-reliant and self-important. He thought it was about him. And then his leadership, Saul's leadership, set a bad example. The people saw what he did, and God, through the prophet Samuel, declared that Saul would no longer be the king. He was going to be out. And now, if you're like me and you've spent time watching the Crown on Netflix, you know that typically the crown is handed down from one generation to the next within the same family, the same last name, so to speak. Saul was the king, and surely if he wasn't going to be king, one of his boys would be the next king. Jonathan, being one of those sons, would have his future kingship taken from him. He wouldn't be king. His brothers wouldn't be king because of their father's failures. And then this next king outside of the family ends up being this little out of nowhere, out of nothing guy named David. Now, if this were a modern television series, or almost really any of the ancient stories as well, you'd probably expect Jonathan to connive a sequence of events that would allow him to take back what was rightfully his. He would find a way to become king somehow, some way, right? But that's not the way this story goes. You think it would be that way, but Jonathan instead humbly befriends David. And he finds a way to be both loyal to his friend and also loyal to his father, even as his father tries multiple times to have David killed. Samuel writes a fair amount about this relationship between these two. Check it out this week if you have time. In 1 Samuel chapter 20, we see that David makes a promise with Jonathan that he will be loyal to Jonathan and his descendants should anything ever happen to him. And then Samuel writes this: Jonathan had David reaffirm this oath out of love for him because he loved him as he loved himself. Jonathan is an example of a friend who is selfless, of one who is humble, one who is loyal. And he reminded and encouraged David multiple times throughout his kingship that God was with him, that he was there because God had plans for him as king. Imagine the humility that Jonathan showed. Jonathan was a man who was guided by God's truth rather than what others around him almost certainly had to be telling him, rather than what his own heart most likely would have been tempted to pursue in regards to the kingdom, the kingship. And so let me ask you this: do you have a Jonathan in your life? Better yet, would somebody else say that you are their Jonathan? You know, if you want to have friends, you need to be a friend. Now maybe there's some skepticism as you're hearing this, as you're sitting at home or wherever watching this and considering, this sounds good, but I'm sure that this level of friendship is what some people are seeking out, but I just don't really need it. You know, what you don't know is I've been burned before, maybe you're thinking. Or I've tried making friends, and it lasted for a while and everything was good and then just kind of fizzled out. Or, you know, I kind of just like having a lot of buddies, like those people that I bowl with, or that I go to ball games with, or that I hunt with, or whatever it is that you would like to do. And those are good. It's good to have those relationships. Maybe you're just thinking, you know, I have my wife or my husband, I have my kids, I have my siblings. That's enough for me. I have all the relationships I need within my family. Again, that's fantastic if that's true for you, that you're close with your spouse or close with your kids or siblings. God designed family to do much of what those things could accomplish. But it seems pretty clear to me that in God's great design and plan, what we see on the pages of Scripture is that one of the tools that He gives humans to help them flourish are relationships with one another. Deep, meaningful friendships. Now, as helpful as it might be to consider what Solomon has to say, to look at the bond as we did between friends like David and Jonathan, and I didn't even get to friends like Elijah and Elisha, or Paul and Timothy, or Titus, or Barnabas, or Silas, all people that seem to be very close to Paul. No, today I want to point you in the end here towards the example of Jesus. You see, Jesus had the crowds, the people that followed him where he went. He had interactions with them, and serious interactions with them, and one-on-one conversations at times with people within the crowd. They wanted to get to know him better, and they followed him, kind of like a person might have followers today on social media or in other forums. Jesus, though, spoke with love and compassion to and about those people. They were important to him. The crowds, the people out there were important to him. But then, if you shrink it in a little bit, there's this group of 12, right? The disciples that stood out even more in closeness or in friendship. He was present with them. He did more with them. He knew more about them than he did the crowds. He knew their families and interacted with them. In John chapter 15, we see Jesus interacting with his disciples. He had just given them a picture of of staying connected to Him and the importance of that by the picture of the vine and the branches. He told them that if they were going to flourish, they needed to stay close to Him relationally. They needed to be in a deep friendship with Him. And then He tells them this. He says, guys, my command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for his friends. Jesus, of course, would do this a short while later for the 12, and really for all who would come to know Him and have their sins forgiven by Him. Jesus goes on to say, you are my friends if you do what I command. What was that command again? Love each other as I have loved you. Be a friend like I've been a friend to you. And then He says this, I no longer call you servants, guys. We've been together. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I've called you friends. For everything that I learned from my Father, I have made known to you. Jesus called them friends. He let them in close. He let them know everything. Do you have that closeness with Jesus? And do you have a similar level of closeness with a friend or a set of friends? People that you let in close. People that you share your stuff with. People that know the real you, and vice versa. You were meant to have meaningful relationships, meaningful friendships. You were meant to have a Jonathan, and you were meant to be a Jonathan to another. From the lips of Solomon, be wise, be careful as you choose your friends, because you can't be wise without real friendship. I hope you'll consider that this week as you look at your life and you think about the level of friendships that you have. Grateful for those that are in that close circle. But if you find yourself lacking, I would just encourage you to spend some time with God, to think about those traits that we talked about in seeking out friendships, no matter your stage of life, by the way, and that you would gain lasting, real friendship. You will not regret it. Thanks for being with us this morning. Hope the rest of your day goes well. Get out there and do something fun. Find a way to build new friendships.